The radar operator's coffee went cold as he stared at the impossible signature. 23,000 feet above the Nevada desert, something that shouldn't exist was painting on his screen. The blip moved with the deliberate precision of a military aircraft, but according to every database, every flight plan, every classified manifest he had clearance to access, nothing was supposed to be there. The operator's hand hesitated over the scramble button. In 12 years of monitoring restricted airspace, he'd never seen anything like it. Major Dakota, Raven, Winters felt the familiar weight of solitude at 30,000 feet. The cockpit of her F-117 Nighthawk had become more home than anywhere on Earth, its angular stealth geometry cutting through thin air like a blade through silk. Below her, the Mojave stretched endlessly, its ancient geology holding secrets deeper than the ones locked in her aircraft's classified systems. She adjusted her grip on the stick, muscle memory guiding microcorrections that kept her invisible to the world below. The desert had witnessed nuclear tests, experimental flights and technologies that wouldn't see daylight for decades. Today, it would witness something else entirely. 300 miles southeast, Captain Luca's Ghost, Morrison was already suiting up when the scramble alert screamed through Nellie's Air Force Base. His F-22 Raptor sat ready in the hangar, its twin engines capable of pushing him past Mach 2 in a matter of minutes. Ghost had earned his call sign during night interdiction missions over hostile territory, appearing from nowhere to eliminate threats before vanishing back into darkness. But this mission felt different. The briefing had been unusually sparse. Investigate unknown aircraft violating restricted airspace. Maintain visual contact. Do not engage without authorization. What they hadn't told him was why two of the Pentagon's most senior intelligence officers had arrived at Nellie's 40 minutes before the alert. The morning sun cast long shadows across the flight line as Ghost's Raptor lifted off, its afterburners painting twin streams of fire against the desert sky. His wingman, Captain Elena Viper Rodriguez, flew in perfect formation 3 miles to his right, her aircraft's advanced sensors already probing the area where their mysterious target had last been detected. Both pilots were veterans of operations that existed only in redacted reports, but neither had ever been tasked with intercepting something their own military couldn't identify. Dakota saw them coming long before they could see her. The Nighthawk's passive sensors painted a clear picture. Two F-22s approaching fast from the southeast, their radar signatures unmistakable. She smiled grimly behind her oxygen mask. After 18 months of flying missions that officially didn't exist, someone had finally noticed. The question wasn't whether they would find her. The question was what would happen when they did. Ghost's targeting computer acquired the bogey at 27 miles, but what he saw made him question his instruments. The aircraft's radar cross-section was impossibly small, barely registering even at close range. More puzzling was its flight profile: steady, confident, showing no signs of evasive action despite being tracked by two of the most advanced fighters in the world. Either their target was completely unaware of being hunted, or whoever was flying it had nerves of absolute steel. Raven 1-1, this is Viper 2-2, I have visual contact. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the encrypted channel. Jesus Christ, Ghost, you seeing this? Ghost looked where his wingman was pointing and felt his blood freeze. The aircraft ahead of them was definitely an F-117, but something was wrong with the picture. The Nighthawk program had been officially retired 5 years ago, all airframes either mothballed or relegated to training roles. Yet here was a pristine example, flying in restricted airspace with modifications he'd never seen before. The tail markings were partially visible, and what he could make out made his mouth go dry. Dakota watched the F-22's close formation behind her, maintaining a respectful distance while their pilots tried to process what they were seeing. She keyed her radio to the emergency frequency, knowing the conversation that followed would change everything. When she spoke, her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had stared death in the face and learned to call it by name. Ghost and Viper, this is Raven. You boys lost. The silence that followed stretched for nearly 10 seconds. Ghost had flown with dozens of pilots, male and female, across multiple theaters of operation. But there was something in that voice, a quiet confidence that spoke of experience beyond her apparent years, and an edge that suggested this pilot had seen things that would give seasoned veterans nightmares. Rodriguez was the first to respond, professional training overriding her confusion. Unknown aircraft, you are in violation of restricted airspace. Identify yourself and state your intentions. Dakota's laugh carried a hint of bitter amusement. Restricted airspace. Viper, I was flying missions over this desert when you were still trying to figure out the difference between the stick and the rudder pedals. As for identification, check your classified databases. Look up Project Shadowmere, authorization level Omega 7. Ghost felt a chill that had nothing to do with altitude. Omega 7 clearance was reserved for operations that existed in the deepest black. He'd heard whispers of Shadowmere in the corridors of Langley, fragments of conversations that ended abruptly when junior officers approached. Whatever this pilot was involved in, it was several pay grades above his security level. The three aircraft continued their strange formation dance across the Nevada sky. Two cutting-edge interceptors shadowing a supposedly retired stealth fighter flown by a woman who spoke like she owned the airspace around them. Ghost studied the F-117's profile through his targeting pod, noting modifications that definitely weren't standard. Additional sensor blisters, what appeared to be an upgraded engine exhaust system, and those mysterious tail markings that seemed to shimmer and shift in the desert light. Dakota felt the familiar weight of command settling across her shoulders. These pilots were good. Their formation discipline was textbook perfect, and they'd approached her aircraft with exactly the right mixture of caution and professionalism. But they had no idea what they'd stumbled into. Project Shadowmere existed in the spaces between official military doctrine and desperate necessity, where operations were conducted by people who had volunteered to become ghosts in service of their country. "Raven, this is Nellie's control." A new voice joined the frequency, tight with barely controlled tension. "You are ordered to land immediately at Nellie's Air Force Base for debriefing. Acknowledge." Dakota's response carried the weight of 18 months of missions that had taken her into the heart of enemy territory. 18 months of pretending to be dead, while her country asked her to do the impossible. "Negative control. My mission parameters don't include social visits. Ghost, Viper, you're welcome to continue this escort, but I have places to be." The F-117 banked left with fluid grace, beginning a turn that would take it deeper into restricted airspace. Ghost found himself making a decision that would haunt his dreams for years to come. Instead of breaking off and returning to base as protocol demanded, he matched the turn, settling into formation with an aircraft that officially didn't exist, flown by a pilot who was supposed to be dead. Rodriguez's voice held a note of disbelief. "Ghost, what the hell are we doing?" "Following orders, Viper. Our mission was to maintain visual contact with the bogey. The bogey is still flying, so we're still flying." Ghost's words carried more confidence than he felt. Something about the woman calling herself Raven had triggered recognition in the deepest part of his military instincts. The part that understood when someone had earned the right to bend rules that lesser pilots couldn't even touch. Dakota felt a reluctant respect for her escorts. Lesser pilots would have broken off by now, returning to base to file reports and let others make the hard decisions. But these two were staying with her, following their orders to the letter even as those orders led them into increasingly murky waters. She keyed her radio again, this time allowing a trace of warmth to enter her voice. "Appreciate the company, boys. It gets lonely up here sometimes." The admission carried more weight than Ghost initially realized. Flying alone in experimental aircraft over hostile territory was a special kind of isolation that few people could understand. The fact that she was acknowledging their presence, treating them as colleagues rather than obstacles, suggested depths to her story that went far beyond simple rule-breaking. As they flew deeper into the heart of the Nevada test and training range, the landscape below told its own story of secrets. Dry lake beds marked the sites of atmospheric nuclear tests from decades past. their scarred surfaces bearing witness to humanity's capacity for both creation and destruction. Hidden installations dotted the terrain, their purposes known only to those with the highest security clearances. And somewhere in that maze of classified facilities and forgotten experiments, Project Shadowmere had been born. Dakota's F-117 began a shallow descent, its destination becoming clear as a cluster of hangars appeared on the horizon. The facility wasn't on any public maps, its existence known only to a select few within the Pentagon's most classified programs. Ghost recognized some of the aircraft scattered around the flight line: experimental fighters, modified bombers, and things that defied easy categorization. Whatever Shadowmere was, it operated from here. Raven, be advised, you have additional company inbound. Rodriguez's voice carried a new tension. 4 more Raptors approaching from the north. These guys don't look as friendly as we do. Dakota's sensors had already painted the new threats. For F-22s in attack formation, their pilots undoubtedly carrying orders to bring her in by any means necessary. The game was escalating beyond her ability to control it, but that was fine. She'd always known this day would come. The only question was whether she could get her aircraft to safety before someone made a decision that couldn't be undone. Ghost watched the tactical display with growing unease. The incoming Raptors were from the 422nd Test and Evaluation Squadron, pilots known for their aggressive interpretation of intercept protocols. If Raven was going to reach her destination intact, she needed protection. The thought of American pilots potentially engaging each other over Nevada airspace made his stomach clench. But the alternative, letting those cowboys from the 422nd possibly damage or destroy whatever classified project this woman represented, seemed worse. The decision crystallized in his mind with startling clarity. Viper, form up on me. We're escorting Raven to her destination. Ghost, that's going to put us between American pilots and their target. Are you sure about this? Ghost looked at the F-117 ahead of him, its angular form cutting through the thin air with lethal grace. Whoever was flying that aircraft had spoken of missions and clearance levels that placed her in the most dangerous echelons of military service. Sometimes protecting your country meant protecting the people who fought its secret wars, even when those people operated in shadows so deep that daylight couldn't reach them. I'm sure, Viper, Raven's one of ours. Dakota felt something shift in her chest as Ghost's Raptor moved to a protective position off her starboard wing, with Rodriguez mirroring the formation to port. In 18 months of flying alone, carrying out missions that existed only in the memories of a handful of intelligence officers, she'd forgotten what it felt like to have wingmen. The sensation was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it meant she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. Terrifying because it meant these good pilots might pay a price for their loyalty. The four F-22s from the 422nd closed rapidly, their aggressive approach leaving no doubt about their intentions. The lead pilot's voice crackled over the emergency frequency, all business and no warmth. Unidentified aircraft. This is Hammer 11. You will comply with landing instructions immediately or we will be authorized to use force. Acknowledge. Dakota's response was calm, almost conversational. Hammer 11, this is Raven. Your landing instructions conflict with my mission parameters. Suggest you contact your chain of command for clarification. Raven, you have 10 seconds to begin descent procedures. After that, we are authorized to engage. Ghost felt his finger hover over his weapon's release switch. The irony of potentially engaging fellow American pilots not lost on him. But Raven had used terminology and clearance codes that suggested she was operating under authority that superseded normal command structures. Sometimes in the military, you had to choose between following orders and doing what was right. Today, those two imperatives seem to be in direct conflict. The mysterious F-117 began its final approach to the classified facility, its landing gear extending with mechanical precision. Ghost and Rodriguez maintained their protective formation even as the four hammers closed to weapons range. The next 60 seconds would determine whether American pilots would fire on each other over the Nevada desert, or whether cooler heads would prevail. Dakota felt the familiar bump as her main gear touched the runway. The classified facility's emergency lights painting red streaks across her canopy. Behind her, Ghost and Rodriguez maintained their cover, while the four hammers circled overhead like angry wasps. She keyed her radio one final time, knowing that her next words would either diffuse the situation or make it exponentially worse. Hammer Flight, this is Colonel Dakota Winters, Project Shadowmere, Authorization Omega-7 Alpha. Stand down immediately and return to base. That is a direct order from a superior officer. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Ghost felt his worldview shifting as pieces of a puzzle he hadn't realized he was solving suddenly clicked into place. Colonel Winters. The name was familiar from briefings about pilots who had died in classified operations, but clearly those reports had been carefully crafted fiction. Dakota, Raven, Winters wasn't dead. She was something far more dangerous. She was a ghost who had chosen to come back to life. Hammer 11's response carried the stunned confusion of a pilot whose certainties had just been shattered. Colonel Winters, confirm your status. You were reported killed in action 14 months ago. Dakota's laugh held no humor, only the bitter knowledge of sacrifices that couldn't be shared with anyone who lacked the proper clearance. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, Hammer. Now return to base and forget you saw anything here today. That's an order. As her F-117 rolled to a stop in front of a hangar that didn't officially exist, Dakota reflected on the strange turn her day had taken. Two young pilots had risked their careers to protect her, operating on nothing but instinct, and the military's unwritten code that you protect your own. Ghost and Rodriguez had earned something precious today, her respect, and possibly a glimpse into a world that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional military service. Ghost watched the hangar doors close behind Raven's aircraft, sealing away secrets he wasn't cleared to know. But as he banked his Raptor toward Nellie's, he carried with him the memory of a voice that had spoken of missions and sacrifices that went beyond normal military service. Colonel Dakota Winters was alive, operating in the deepest shadows of American military power, and today she had reminded them all that some battles could only be fought by people willing to become legends in their own time. The desert sun continued its arc across the Nevada sky, casting long shadows over facilities that held America's most closely guarded secrets. In the classified world of black operations and deniable missions, one woman had emerged from the shadows just long enough to remind everyone that some warriors never truly come home. They simply learn to fight different wars in different skis, carrying burdens that can never be shared with anyone who hasn't earned the right to bear them alongside her. Rodriguez's voice broke the contemplative silence as they headed back to Nellie's. "Ghost, what the hell just happened back there?" Ghost considered his answer carefully, knowing that whatever words he chose would have to carry the weight of everything they'd witnessed. "We just met a real warrior, Viper, the kind they don't make anymore." His words carried a respect earned through shared danger and mutual recognition of something that transcended normal military hierarchies. But the day's revelations were far from over. As Ghost and Rodriguez approached Nellie's, their radios crackled with an emergency transmission that would change everything they thought they knew about their encounter with the mysterious Colonel Winters. The message was brief, coded, and carried an authorization level that made both pilots' blood run cold. "All stations, this is Prairie Fire Control. Operation Shadowmere assets are compromised. Repeat, Shadowmere is compromised. All personnel with knowledge of today's intercept are to report for immediate debriefing." Dakota stood in the hangar, watching technicians swarm over her F-117 like ants over a dropped sandwich. The aircraft bore scars from missions that would never appear in any official record. Bullet holes patched with experimental composites, burn marks from surface-to-air missiles that had come too close, and modifications that pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible. Each mark told a story of desperate fights in skis where capture meant not just death, but the exposure of operations that could destabilize entire regions. Dr. Elizabeth Kane approached from the hangar's shadowed depths, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. As Shadowmere's project director, she carried the weight of decisions that affected global security, but today her usual composure seemed strained. "Dakota, we have a problem. Your encounter with those F-22 pilots has triggered a security review at the highest levels. There are people in Washington who think Shadowmere has outlived its usefulness." Dakota felt the familiar knot of tension form in her stomach. For 18 months, she had flown missions that pushed her aircraft and her skills to their absolute limits, carrying out operations in denied airspace where American military presence couldn't be officially acknowledged. She had become a weapon in the hands of people who fought wars that the public would never know existed. But weapons, even the most sophisticated ones, eventually outlived their strategic value. How long do we have before they make their decision? Dakota's voice carried the flat calm of someone who had learned to compartmentalize fear in order to function under impossible circumstances. Dr. Kane's expression was grim. "Maybe a week, maybe less. There are forces in the Pentagon who see Shadowmere as a liability rather than an asset. They think the risks of discovery outweigh the operational benefits." She paused, studying Dakota's face for any sign of the strain that had to be eating away at her. "There's something else. The pilots who escorted you today, Ghost and Viper, they're being brought in for debriefing. Depending on what they tell the intelligence officers, they could either validate Shadowmere's importance or provide ammunition for the people who want us shut down." Dakota closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settle across her shoulders like a familiar coat. Ghost and Rodriguez had acted out of instinct and loyalty, but their protection had potentially exposed them to consequences they couldn't have imagined. In the world of classified operations, good intentions were often punished as severely as malicious acts. Meanwhile, at Nellie's Air Force Base, Ghost and Rodriguez found themselves in a windowless conference room, facing three intelligence officers whose credentials were so classified that even their names were redacted on the folders spread across the metal table. The lead interrogator, a woman who introduced herself only as Agent Stone, had the kind of eyes that suggested she had seen enough classified operations to remain unimpressed by anything short of a full confession. "Captain Morrison, Captain Rodriguez, we need to understand exactly what happened during your encounter with the unidentified aircraft. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." Stone's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to asking questions that people answered whether they wanted to or not. Ghost met her gaze steadily, drawing on years of training that had prepared him for this moment. "We responded to a scramble alert for an unknown aircraft in restricted airspace. Upon intercept, we identified an F-117 Nighthawk with unusual modifications. The pilot identified herself as Colonel Dakota Winters, operating under Project Shadowmere with Omega-7 Alpha authorization." Stone made a note in her folder, her expression revealing nothing. "Captain Morrison, What was your assessment of Colonel Winter's mental state and operational capabilities? The question struck Ghost as odd, implying concerns about Dakota's fitness for duty that hadn't been apparent during their encounter. Colonel Winters demonstrated exceptional piloting skills and complete situational awareness. Her radio communications were professional and indicated extensive knowledge of classified procedures. If there are questions about her capabilities, they weren't evident from our interaction. Rodriguez nodded in agreement, adding her own observations. The colonel's aircraft handling was textbook perfect, and she showed no signs of stress or disorientation despite being intercepted by multiple fighters. Whatever missions she's been flying, she's clearly maintained her proficiency standards. Agent Stone exchanged glances with her colleagues before continuing. Are you aware that Colonel Dakota Winters was officially declared killed in action 14 months ago? According to Air Force records, she died when her aircraft was shot down during a classified mission over hostile territory. The revelation hit both pilots like a physical blow. Ghost felt his worldview shifting again, pieces of a puzzle rearranging themselves into a picture that was both clearer and more disturbing than anything he'd imagined. Ma'am, the woman we encountered today was very much alive. Are you suggesting that official records were falsified? Stone's smile held no warmth. I'm not suggesting anything, Captain. I'm asking you to help us understand what you witnessed today and what it might mean for national security. Her tone implied that the wrong answers could have consequences that extended far beyond a simple debriefing. Back at the Shadowmere facility, Dakota was conducting her own form of damage assessment. The hangar held aircraft that represented billions of dollars in research and development, experimental platforms that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in aviation technology. But more than that, it held the dreams and sacrifices of people who had dedicated their lives to fighting wars that couldn't be acknowledged by the very government they served. Chief Master Sergeant Marcus Tank Thompson approached her with the measured gait of a man who had survived 3 decades of military service by learning to read situations before they exploded in his face. As Shadowmere's senior enlisted advisor, Tank had seen operations come and go, but he'd never worked with a pilot who carried herself with Dakota's unique combination of skill and haunted determination. Colonel, the techs have finished their post-flight inspection. Your bird's clean, but we've got word that Washington is asking uncomfortable questions about today's activities. Tank's voice carried the blunt honesty of someone who had earned the right to speak truth to power, regardless of rank or protocol. Dakota nodded, unsurprised by the news. In the world of classified operations, visibility was synonymous with vulnerability. The moment she had keyed her radio to communicate with Ghost and Rodriguez, She had started a chain of events that could potentially unravel everything Shadowmere had accomplished. But the alternative, allowing American pilots to potentially engage each other over a misunderstanding, had seemed worse. Tank, what's your assessment of our operational security? Dakota asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The veteran sergeant's expression was grim. Compromised, ma'am. Too many people saw too much today, and the ripples are spreading faster than we can contain them. Dr. Kane thinks we might have a week before decisions get made above our pay grade, but honestly, Colonel, I think we're looking at hours, not days. Dakota felt a familiar surge of determination, the same feeling that had carried her through missions where the margin between success and catastrophe was measured in seconds and inches. Shadowmere represented more than just another military program. It was a testament to what could be accomplished when people were willing to sacrifice everything in service of their country. If political considerations were about to terminate the program, then perhaps it was time to demonstrate its value in ways that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Tank, I want you to prep the backup aircraft. Full mission loadout, complete stealth configuration. Dakota's voice carried the calm authority of someone issuing orders that would reshape the strategic landscape. If Washington wants to understand what Shadowmere brings to the table, then maybe it's time for a demonstration they'll never forget. The hangar suddenly felt electric with purpose as Tank began issuing orders to the technical crews. Aircraft that had been dormant began coming online, their systems awakening with electronic whispers that spoke of capabilities beyond conventional military doctrine. Dakota walked among them like a general reviewing troops before battle, knowing that the next few hours would determine not just the fate of Shadowmere, but the future of unconventional warfare itself. At Nellie's, Ghost and Rodriguez were beginning to understand that their encounter with Colonel Winters had drawn them into something far more complex than a simple airspace violation. Agent Stone's questions were becoming increasingly specific, probing not just what they had observed, but their psychological reactions to meeting someone who was supposedly dead. The implication was clear. The intelligence community was trying to determine whether Dakota Winters represented an asset or a threat. Captain Morrison, in your professional opinion, did Colonel Winters demonstrate any behavior that might suggest psychological instability or compromised loyalty? Stone's question carried undertones that made Ghost's skin crawl. Absolutely not, Ghost replied without hesitation. Colonel Winters demonstrated complete professionalism and clear adherence to military protocols throughout our encounter. Any suggestion that she represents a security risk is unsupported by the evidence. His words carried the conviction of someone willing to stake his career on his assessment. Stone made another note, her expression unreadable. Captain, Are you aware that questioning the evaluation of superior officers can be considered insubordination? The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Ghost felt the familiar surge of anger that came when bureaucrats tried to intimidate warriors who had earned their place through blood and skill, rather than political maneuvering. Ma'am, with respect, my oath was to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, not to provide convenient answers to intelligence officers who apparently have predetermined conclusions. The tension in the room ratcheted up several levels as Stone's colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Ghost's defiance had crossed a line that could have serious consequences for his career, but he found himself caring less about personal repercussions than about protecting a fellow pilot who had clearly sacrificed more than anyone in this room could understand. Rodriguez placed a steadying hand on Ghost's arm, her own voice carrying quiet support. Agent Stone, Captain Morrison's assessment matches my own observations. Colonel Winters demonstrated exceptional competence and clear mission focus. If there are concerns about her operational status, they should be addressed through appropriate military channels, not through intimidation of the pilots who encountered her. Back at Shadowmere, Dakota was making final preparations for what might be the program's last official mission. The modified F-117 that would carry her into history sat ready in the hangar, its weapons bays loaded with ordnance that didn't appear on any inventory sheet. Dr. Kane watched from the observation deck, her face reflecting the weight of decisions that could reshape international relations. Dakota, are you certain this is the right course of action? Dr. Kane's voice carried the concern of someone who understood the potential consequences of what they were about to attempt. Once you cross that line, there's no going back. Shadowmere becomes either vindicated or terminated, with no middle ground. Dakota sealed her helmet, feeling the familiar comfort of systems that had kept her alive through impossible missions. Elizabeth, 18 months ago you asked me to become a weapon for my country. Today, that weapon is being questioned by people who have never had to make life-or-death decisions at 30,000 feet. If they need a demonstration of value, then that's what they'll get. The hangar doors began opening, revealing the desert landscape that had witnessed so many secrets over the decades. Dakota's F-117 rolled toward the runway, its angular form cutting through the afternoon light like a shark through water. Behind her, the Shadowmere facility continued its work, but everyone involved understood that the program's future now rested in the hands of one pilot, and whatever mission awaited her in the classified darkness ahead. As Dakota's aircraft lifted off into the Nevada sky, Ghost and Rodriguez were facing their own moment of decision. Agent Stone had made it clear that their cooperation with the Intelligence Review could determine not just their own futures, but potentially the fate of Colonel Winters and whatever program she represented. The choice between personal safety and loyalty to a fellow warrior had never been starker. "Captains, I'm going to ask you one final time," Stone said, her voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. "Based on your encounter with the individual claiming to be Colonel Dakota Winters, do you believe she represents a security risk to the United States Air Force?" Ghost met Rodriguez's eyes across the metal table, seeing his own determination reflected in her expression. Some decisions transcended career considerations and personal safety. Sometimes, loyalty to fellow warriors meant accepting whatever consequences came from standing up for what was right. "Agent Stone," Ghost said, his voice carrying quiet conviction, "Colonel Dakota Winters is exactly the kind of pilot the Air Force needs more of, not fewer. If her program is under review, then the reviewers need to understand that they're evaluating someone who represents the absolute best of American military aviation." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Stone closing her folder with finality. "Very well, captains. This interview is concluded. You'll be contacted if further information is required." Her tone suggested that Ghost and Rodriguez had just made a decision that would follow them for the remainder of their careers. As the two pilots left the windowless conference room, neither knowing whether they had just saved or doomed their careers, Dakota's F-117 was climbing toward an altitude where the sky began to fade from blue to black. Her destination was classified even from most Shadowmere personnel, but her mission was simple in its complexity: demonstrate why some wars could only be fought by people willing to become legends in their own time. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the Nevada desert as three separate dramas played out across the landscape. In a classified facility that didn't officially exist, technicians prepared for a mission that could validate or terminate years of development. At Nellis Air Force Base, two pilots faced the consequences of choosing loyalty over career security. And high above it all, a woman who was supposed to be dead flew toward a confrontation that would determine whether sacrifice and heroism still had value in a world increasingly dominated by political considerations and risk-averse bureaucracy. The stage was set for a demonstration that would either vindicate the warrior's way or serve as its epitaph, written in contrails across a sky that had witnessed the birth and death of too many dreams to count. Dakota, Raven, Winters was about to remind everyone that some battles could only be won by people willing to pay any price to protect the values they held most dear. As her aircraft disappeared into the classified darkness beyond the horizon, the desert wind began to pick up, carrying with it the whispered promises and threats that had shaped American military aviation for generations. Today, those whispers would either be validated by victory or silenced by the bureaucratic machinery that consumed heroes as efficiently as it created them. The sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that reminded everyone watching of the blood and treasure that had been spent in service of ideals that transcended individual lives and careers. Dakota Winters flew toward her destiny, carrying with her the hopes of everyone who believed that some principles were worth dying for, and the fears of those who understood that heroes were often destroyed by the very people they sacrificed everything to protect. In the gathering dusk, 3 aircraft signatures converged on a destination that existed only in the darkest corners of military planning, where operations were conceived that could never be acknowledged but could never be abandoned. The next few hours would determine whether America still had room for warriors who operated beyond the boundaries of conventional military doctrine, or whether the age of heroes had finally ended in committee rooms and conference tables, where courage was measured by political expedience rather than personal sacrifice. The Nevada desert had kept America's secrets for decades, its vast emptiness serving as a canvas for dreams and nightmares that shaped the nation's military capabilities. Tonight, it would witness either the birth of a new legend or the death of an old dream, as Dakota, Raven, Winters flew toward a confrontation that would test everything she had learned about duty, honor, and the price of serving a country that sometimes forgot the value of the people who protected it. Her radio crackled to life with a transmission that would change the trajectory of her mission and possibly her life. "Raven, this is Prairie Fire Actual. Your demonstration has been approved at the highest levels. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. Repeat, weapons-free. Show them what Shadowmere can do." Dakota felt a grim smile cross her face as she acknowledged the transmission. After 18 months of operating in the shadows, she was finally being given the chance to step into the light and demonstrate why some missions could only be accomplished by people who had learned to thrive in the space between life and death. The Nevada sky stretched ahead of her, infinite and unforgiving, ready to bear witness to whatever came next. Behind her, the Shadowmere facility continued its preparations, while ahead lay a target that represented everything wrong with bureaucratic oversight of military operations. Tonight, Colonel Dakota, Raven, Winters would remind everyone that wars were won by warriors, not by committees, and that some victories could only be achieved by people willing to sacrifice everything for principles that transcended personal considerations. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, ancient lights that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of heroes, and the eternal struggle between those who sought to protect and those who sought to destroy. Tonight, they would witness another chapter in that eternal story, written in contrails and confirmed by the roar of engines pushing the boundaries of what was possible in the service of what was necessary. Dakota's F-117 flew on through the night, carrying with it the dreams of everyone who believed in the warrior's code and the fears of those who understood that heroism often came with a price that extended far beyond the individual who chose to pay it. The mission ahead would test everything she had learned about flying, fighting, and surviving in a world that demanded impossible sacrifices from people who were willing to make them. In the distance, her target waited, unaware that it was about to become part of a demonstration that would reshape how America's military leadership viewed the value of unconventional operations. The night sky spread ahead like a battlefield, and Dakota Winters flew toward it with the calm determination of someone who had already made peace with whatever consequences awaited her in the darkness beyond the horizon. The Nevada desert held its breath, waiting to see whether one woman's sacrifice would validate a program that pushed the boundaries of what was possible, or whether the bureaucratic machinery of modern military politics would consume another hero in its relentless appetite for conformity and risk aversion. Either way, the sky would remember what happened next, and those who witnessed it would carry the memory for the rest of their lives. Dakota's hands moved across her controls with practiced precision, preparing systems that represented the cutting edge of American military technology. Each switch, each display, each carefully calibrated instrument represented years of development and millions of dollars in research. But more than that, they represented the faith that someone, somewhere, still believed in the value of warriors who were willing to venture into the unknown in service of their country. The mission clock showed less than 30 minutes to target, and Dakota felt the familiar surge of anticipation that came before every engagement. Win or lose, survive or die, she would demonstrate that Shadomir represented more than just another weapon system. It represented the continuation of a tradition that stretched back to the earliest days of military aviation, when pilots had been willing to climb into experimental aircraft and fly into the unknown because someone had to, and they were the ones willing to do it. Her radio remained silent as she approached the final phase of her mission, but Dakota knew that people all across the military establishment were watching, waiting to see whether she would validate their faith or confirm their fears. The next few minutes would determine not just the fate of Shadomir, but the future of every pilot who dared to operate beyond the comfortable boundaries of conventional military doctrine. The target complex materialized on her targeting display like a constellation of malevolent stars. 30 miles ahead, a facility that officially didn't exist was conducting research that threatened to destabilize global security balances. Intelligence reports suggested that foreign agents had penetrated deep into classified American programs, stealing technology that could render entire categories of military hardware obsolete. Tonight's mission was simple in its brutality. Eliminate the threat before it could spread beyond containment. Dakota's weapon systems came online with electronic whispers that spoke of precision and lethality. Her F-117 carried ordnance that didn't appear in any official inventory, weapons designed specifically for targets that couldn't be engaged through conventional channels. The moral weight of what she was about to do settled across her shoulder like a familiar burden. In 18 months of classified operations, she had learned that sometimes protecting innocence required actions that would haunt the protector forever. The facility's defenses painted her aircraft with search radars, but the Nighthawk stealth technology rendered their efforts futile. Dakota watched the electronic waterfalls cascade across her threat display, each spike representing a system that was looking for her but couldn't find her. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was using American technology to attack what appeared to be an American facility. But in the world of black operations, nationality was often less important than loyalty to principles that transcended borders. Her targeting computer achieved lock on the primary structure, a hardened bunker that intelligence suggested contained the most sensitive research materials. Dakota's finger hovered over the weapon's release, but something made her hesitate. In the green glow of her night vision display, she could see vehicles in the facility's parking area, lights in windows that suggested people were working late into the night. Scientists, technicians, security personnel, people who might not even know what their facility was really being used for. The radio crackled to life with a transmission that changed everything. "Raven, this is Control. Be advised, we have intelligence indicating the facility may contain American personnel operating under deep cover. Abort mission and return to base immediately." Dakota felt her blood freeze as the implications sank in. The mission that was supposed to validate Shadowmere's importance had just become a potential disaster that could destroy everything the program had accomplished. But as she began to bank away from the target, her passive sensors detected something that made her reconsider. Aircraft approaching from the south, their radar signatures suggesting they weren't American. Through her headset came another voice, one she recognized from intelligence briefings about foreign military capabilities. "American aircraft, you are in violation of sovereign airspace. Depart immediately or face defensive action." The transmission was in accented English, but the underlying threat was unmistakable. Dakota's mind raced through tactical calculations as the situation escalated beyond her ability to control it. The facility below might contain American personnel, but it was also clearly under foreign military protection. The approaching aircraft were moving into attack formation, their weapons systems coming online, with signatures that matched nothing in American inventory. Whatever was happening at the ground facility, it was important enough that someone was willing to risk international incident to protect it. Control, this is Raven. I have foreign military aircraft approaching my position with apparent hostile intent, requesting clarification of rules of engagement. Dakota's voice remained calm despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She had trained for scenarios like this, but training was always cleaner than reality. The response came not from her usual controllers, but from a voice that carried the authority of the highest levels of military command. Raven, this is Prairie Fire Actual. You are authorized to defend yourself and complete your mission. American personnel have been confirmed evacuated from the target facility. The installation is now considered hostile. Execute your attack. Dakota felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders as she brought her aircraft around for another attack run. Below her, a facility that had been conducting research that threatened American national security was about to learn why some secrets were protected by people who operated beyond the reach of conventional military doctrine. Above her, foreign fighters were positioning themselves to prevent her from completing her mission, apparently unaware that they were facing a pilot who had learned to thrive in situations where survival was measured in milliseconds and inches. The targeting reticle settled over the bunker complex as Dakota's weapon systems achieved final lock. Her finger found the release trigger as enemy fighters began their attack runs, their missile launches painting bright streaks across her threat display. For a moment that seemed to stretch forever, the Nevada night was filled with the electronic screams of weapon systems seeking their targets, each side committed to a course of action that couldn't be undone. Dakota's ordnance left her aircraft with barely perceptible jolts, precision-guided munitions that would reshape the landscape below in ways that could never be publicly acknowledged. Simultaneously, she rolled into evasive maneuvers as enemy missiles reached out for her like deadly fingers, their proximity fuses seeking the heat signature that would trigger detonation. The sky around her erupted in fire and shrapnel as she pushed her aircraft beyond its design limitations, trading altitude for survival in a deadly dance that few pilots ever experienced and fewer survived. The bunker complex disappeared in a series of controlled explosions that lit the night sky like artificial suns. Whatever research had been conducted within those hardened walls was now spreading across the desert in radioactive particles that would render the area uninhabitable for decades. Dakota felt no satisfaction in the destruction, only the grim knowledge that sometimes protecting civilization required actions that pushed the protector beyond the boundaries of civilized behavior. Enemy fighters swarmed around her like angry hornets, their pilots demonstrating skills that suggested extensive training and combat experience. Dakota found herself in a dogfight that tested every lesson she had learned about aerial combat. Her F-117 stealth capabilities, offset by the close-range nature of the engagement. Cannon rounds streaked past her canopy as she pulled G-forces that pushed her to the edge of consciousness. Her aircraft responding to control inputs with the precision of a finely tuned instrument. One of the enemy fighters exploded in a ball of fire as Dakota's own cannon fire found its mark, but three more continued their pursuit, their pilots clearly willing to die to prevent her escape. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. She was fighting foreign pilots over American soil, engaged in a battle that officially wasn't happening, defending a country that might disavow her actions if political considerations demanded it. Her aircraft shuddered as cannon rounds found their mark, warning lights painting her cockpit in ominous reds and ambers. Hydraulic pressure was dropping, fuel was leaking, and her left engine was showing signs of thermal stress that suggested imminent failure. Dakota began calculating glide ratios and emergency landing sites as she continued her evasive maneuvers, knowing that survival now depended as much on luck as skill. "Raven, this is Ghost. We have you on radar and are inbound to assist. Hold your position and try to stay alive for another 2 minutes." The familiar voice cut through the electronic chaos like a lifeline, bringing with it the promise that she wasn't entirely alone in the Nevada night. Dakota felt a surge of emotion that she quickly suppressed, knowing that distraction at this altitude and speed was synonymous with death. Ghost and Rodriguez were risking their careers and possibly their lives to come to her aid, operating without official authorization in a situation that could destroy them all. But that was what wingmen did. They showed up when you needed them most, regardless of the consequences. The night sky erupted with new activity as two F-22 Raptors dove into the engagement, their advanced weapons systems immediately shifting the tactical balance. Ghost's first missile struck an enemy fighter at beyond visual range, while Rodriguez maneuvered to bracket the remaining hostiles in a pincer movement that left them with no good options. The foreign pilots found themselves facing not just Dakota's damaged, but still dangerous F-117, but two of the most advanced interceptors in the world, flown by pilots whose skills had been honed in combat operations across multiple theaters. "Raven, this is Ghost. Form up on me and we'll escort you home. Your bird looks like it's taken some serious damage." Ghost's voice carried the calm professionalism of someone who had flown rescue missions in hostile airspace, but Dakota could hear the underlying concern that came from seeing a fellow pilot's aircraft trailing smoke and hydraulic fluid. Dakota struggled to maintain formation as her F-117's damaged systems continued to degrade. The left engine was now showing definitive signs of imminent failure, and her flight controls were becoming increasingly sluggish as hydraulic pressure continued to drop. But she was alive. Her mission was complete, and she had allies flanking her aircraft in a protective formation that spoke of loyalty transcending official channels. Ghost Viper, I owe you both more than I can ever repay, Dakota transmitted, her voice carrying emotions that 18 months of isolation had taught her to suppress. But you need to understand that helping me tonight might have consequences that extend far beyond your military careers. Rodriguez's response carried the dry humor of someone who had already calculated the costs and decided they were acceptable. Raven, we figured that out about the time we decided to follow a dead pilot into a classified facility. We're all in now, so let's focus on getting everyone home in one piece. The three aircraft continued their flight toward Nellis Air Force Base, trailing behind them the destruction of a facility that had threatened American national security and the evidence of foreign military operations on American soil. But more than that, they carried with them the proof that some principles transcended bureaucratic considerations and political expedience. When warriors called for help, other warriors answered, regardless of the personal costs. Dakota's left engine finally succumbed to battle damage as they crossed into Nellis airspace, but her aircraft remained controllable on single-engine power. Emergency vehicles were already positioned along the runway, their flashing lights painting the desert in alternating red and blue patterns that spoke of preparation for casualties. Dr. Kane and Tank Thompson waited in the shadows beyond the flight line, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether Shadowmere had proven its value or written its own termination orders. As Dakota's F-117 touched down with the grinding screech of damaged landing gear, she reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. 18 months ago, she had volunteered to become a weapon in service of her country, accepting a mission that required her to die in every way except the biological. Tonight, she had demonstrated why that sacrifice had been necessary. But in doing so, she had potentially exposed herself and her program to consequences that could be worse than death. Ghost and Rodriguez landed behind her, their own aircraft undamaged but their careers potentially destroyed by their decision to intervene in a classified operation without authorization. As they climbed down from their cockpits, both pilots wore expressions that suggested they understood the magnitude of what they had done and were prepared to accept whatever consequences followed. The Nevada night wind carried with it the acrid smell of burned aviation fuel and expended ordnance, reminders that war had come to American soil in ways that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. But it also carried the whispered promises of people who had proven that some values transcended individual concerns, and that loyalty between warriors could survive even the most challenging circumstances. Dr. Kane approached Dakota as she completed her post-flight checks, her expression mixing relief and apprehension in equal measures. Dakota, I've just received word from Washington. Your mission results are being reviewed at the highest levels, but early indications suggest that Shadowmere has achieved strategic validation. The destruction of that facility has eliminated a threat that could have compromised multiple ongoing operations. Dakota nodded, but her attention was focused on Ghost and Rodriguez, who were being approached by Air Force security personnel with expressions that suggested their night was far from over. "Elizabeth, what about my wingmen? They risked everything to help me complete the mission. If they face consequences for that, then validation means nothing." The next few hours would determine whether the night's events had created heroes or casualties, whether the demonstration of Shadowmere's capabilities had been worth the potential sacrifice of 3 military careers. But as Dakota watched Ghost and Rodriguez being escorted toward a debriefing that could determine their futures, she knew that regardless of official outcomes, they had proven something that transcended bureaucratic considerations. When warriors stood together, they could accomplish things that individual excellence could never achieve. The stars continued their ancient watch over the Nevada desert, bearing witness to another chapter in the eternal struggle between those who sought to protect and those who sought to destroy. Tonight, the protectors had won, but victory had come at a cost that was still being calculated in committee rooms and conference centers, where the value of heroism was measured against political considerations and risk assessments. Dakota, Raven, Winters had emerged from the shadows to demonstrate why some missions could only be accomplished by people willing to sacrifice everything for principles that transcended personal considerations. Whether that demonstration would validate her program or serve as its epitaph remained to be seen. But the desert wind carried with it the whispered acknowledgement that some battles could only be won by warriors who understood that loyalty was more important than survival, and that duty sometimes required actions that pushed the actor beyond the boundaries of normal human experience. The mission was complete, but the consequences were just beginning, spreading outward like ripples from a stone dropped into still water, affecting lives and careers in ways that couldn't be predicted or controlled. In the end, history would judge whether the night's events had protected American interests or destroyed American warriors. But that judgment would be rendered by people who had never faced the choices that Dakota, Ghost, and Rodriguez had confronted in the deadly skis above the Nevada desert.